Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 184, Disorganized Religion. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Libenson.
And I'm Lex Rofeberg.
And before we get started looking back at the string of episodes that just passed, we want to let you know about something that's coming up in the next week. We are going to be launching our Elul Unbound initiative for the second year in a row. For those who don't know or don't remember, Elul is the month that comes before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You can think of it as the on-ramp to the high holidays, or you can just think of it as an interesting sort of a holiday month, or what we called last year a challah month, that comes before the high holidays, and it's a month of contemplation, of thinking about the year that passed. You can think of it as preparatory for the high holidays, or if the high holidays don't really do it for you, you can think of Elul as the thing itself, as this time to really think about the year that passed and prepare for the year that comes up. We've organized an initiative that will send you an email every day with some ideas to focus your contemplation. And we also have a community that gets together every week on Zoom for a conversation to talk about how they're thinking about Judaism, about their own reflections, and about the year that passed and about the year ahead. And those conversations have been really rich and rewarding for the people who participated in them last year. If you're interested in joining Elul Unbound again this year, or for the first time this year, just head to our website, www.judaismunbound.com, and click on the Elul Unbound link at the top of the page, and you'll be able to sign up for the weekly email and to find out about all the other elements of the initiative. So now let's jump into our conversation looking back at our recent episodes. Lex, I've been thinking a lot about the last 3 episodes in particular, where we've been talking to groups of people that are forming things that you could call organizations, but that you can also look at as sort of not quite organizations. It's not so clear to me that these organizations are necessarily planning to be around forever, or that they would be devastated if it turned out that, you know, a lot of the people moved away and the critical mass wasn't there anymore and the organization had to close, right? They're not investing in real estate or other investments that make it really difficult to be nimble and flexible, even to the point of closing down at some point. And what is exciting about that is that it means, or it seems to mean to me, that they are pouring all of their energy into the here and now, into making these organizations as compelling as possible for their members today. And to me, I think that's the right strategy, right? I think that when we're in this phase that we've talked about a lot, of a transition point in Judaism, where it's clear, the one thing that's clear is that the old institutions, the old ways of doing Judaism are not working for most Jews. And so the question becomes, what should we do? And there's something really exciting about the energy that says, I just want to have something done, and I'm going to pour all of my energy into doing that thing. And if the organization only lasts 5 or 10 years, a lot of times we see that as a failure. We've been taught to see that as a failure in Jewish life. And I want to explore a little bit the possibility that that's not a failure at all, that if that organization has had a strong impact for those 5 or 10 years, that is a huge success potentially, especially if those people go off and start some other project that only lasts for 5 or 10 years. And I guess I want to put out there the possibility that sort of the counterfactual to the expectations of the Jewish community today, that we're trying to build organizations today that are going to somehow stand the test of time and be sustainable. Sustainable is a word that's used a lot, that's going to last forever and ever, and that somehow those are the organizations that are going to take us into the future, as opposed to a vision that this period of time, whether that means a decade or 100 years, is going to be a period of time that's defined by there actually being no organizations that survive.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of specify this, the 3 episodes that you're referring to, I think, are conversations with the urban kibbutz in San Francisco last week, the conversation with Judaism on our own terms 2 weeks ago, the network of campus groups all around the country that are forming interesting iterations of Jewish life. And I think you're referring to the New Synagogue Project, the episode before that. I would For me, I see the latter two of those as a little different than the New Synagogue Project, because they really do seem to be thinking and visioning around a long-term future in a way that the other two might not quite be, and sort of building structures that we're more used to seeing in like synagogue contexts in a new way, and building on, community organizing approaches. But I'm most excited and interested to look specifically at your lens through the Judaism on our own terms conversation, because like on any college campus, what you just described really is the norm. Like I graduated not so long ago from college, 6 years, but I know that already a ton of the student groups that were around on campus when I was there are gone. And, on some level that's sad, like genuinely, like a lot that includes some student groups that were deeply important to me and to others. For, some of them 1 year, for some of them 10 years, for some of them 40, 60 years, however long. But I also know that like tons and tons of groups have arisen in just over half a decade that didn't exist at all when I was there. And I think if you walked into that campus space and took students aside and said that, like, did you know that half the groups in this room are less than 10 years old? I don't think they'd be surprised. Like, I think that's just sort of the lay of the land. Like, yeah, it's a 4-year life cycle. Like a student enters, and I mean, not always 4 years, but usually 4 years. And so as a result, the entire lifespan of organizations and student groups changes too. And as, a post-college person, I'm kind of jealous of that, because I do think that what it means is, by definition, no group is ever just trying to like exist. They want to achieve some goal. Like they want their publication, if it's a publication, to be really great. They want their political organizing group to achieve particular goals. They want their, radio station or a cappella group or whatever to like succeed. Most of them would be just as upset if their student group continued to exist but was crappy as they would be if the student group just didn't exist. Those feel like equally bad results. And I feel like, to be honest, in Jewish life, we don't see those as equally bad results. We see organizations continuing to exist, but sort of coasting, or I use the phrase like getting a solid B in one of these conversations. We see that as like fine. And I really believe that when we really strive to achieve something powerful, something incredible, we do it. Thinking once again about the Judaism on our own terms conversation, I mean, you could write it off as, young and idealistic, shooting for the stars, whatever. But like, I think that they are onto something. And my hope is that won't disappear when they graduate and have whatever jobs in the future. My hope, and even my expectation, to be honest, is that they will take the spirit of these independent Jewish groups and then channel it into independent Jewish groups for people post-college.
Well, it's interesting because, for example, when we're talking about the San Francisco urban kibbutz, one of the people that we interviewed on that episode, Sarah Levy-Linden, has been a key organizer of that group, and now she's moving away from the Bay Area to Los Angeles. So now she's not going to be part of that group anymore. Now, in the typical way that we think about Jewish organizations and whether a Jewish organization should be funded or not, the knock on that sort of story would be, well, you have a key leader who moves away. So first of all, we have to replace that person, or we're not going to fund them anymore, right? We need to make sure that this organization is sustainable. Otherwise, we're not going to fund them anymore. Look, an organization may be a group of friends. Now, the fact that one person moves away, I don't think is necessarily devastating to an organization, and I'm extremely hopeful that it's not devastating to this one. That said, one could imagine that if one moves away, maybe one day all of them will move away. It's really expensive to live in San Francisco, right? Or we could think about DC being a kind of place where, despite what we talked about on the episode, it is true that more people stay in DC than used to, but DC is generally understood to be a a transitional kind of community where there's a lot of people coming in and coming out. And you could say, okay, so then we really want to make sure that we have stable institutions like a Hillel on the campus, or maybe Sixth and I in DC, that say, like, yeah, people are going to move in and out, but this organization is going to always be here for them, so that we can make sure that when people are moving in and out, they are given this kind of high quality experience that can kind of rely on and depend on, that's going to be there despite the vicissitudes of people coming in and coming out. Another way that we can look at it is to say people are highly mobile, that people are moving in and out of places all the time, that people are floating in and out of online communities all the time, and that maybe what would a world look like, what would a Jewish world look like, that was full of all kinds of temporary organizations that came together for short periods of time and that dissipated after relatively short periods of time. What would the advantages of a world like that be? And then I think the implication is that if there are advantages to a world like that, how might we think about a world of Jewish funding, or not necessarily funding, other kinds of support? Because I would point out that one of the really important elements of the support of the San Francisco urban kibbutz, for example, is that there's a program that gathers them together once a year, people that are organizing communities like this, that gathers them together once a year to sort of share best practices and to share ideas with one another. So that's not the kind of financial support that we generally think about, although there are also grants as part of that program. But I want to focus on the fact that what it's doing is a kind of support that's not necessarily financial in the way that we usually think about financial support. What would a world have to look like in order to really allow these kind of temporary organizations of people to be seen as worthy, to be seen as important, to be able to do transformational work without having to make the claim that they are going to be long-term sustainable? Before we get to that specific question, I think what it would be good to talk about would be, what are some of the advantages to that kind of world as opposed to the world that we have? What are the pros? What can only happen in a world of short-term unsustainable organizations or disorganizations that cannot happen in the world of these long-term stable organizations?
Well, I think it's a lot. And I want to hone in beyond the organizational level to like the program level, because I'm going to answer that question too. But I think about so many Jewish communal contexts, from my earliest ones, youth group, even, my synagogue programming growing up, even, good young adult programming, Moishe House, etc. I like so many events that I learned to plan in my Hillel and all these places. The mindset was, this event exists to build a group of people that then will sort of have a bigger body of people to go to the next event. Like every event, every program is sort of focused less on itself, less on being a mind-blowing, divine moment of connection, whether that's to other human beings in the room or to God or to whatever, the holiday that you're marking. It's more about like, we're trying to draw people in to our organization or maintain the people that are already in the organization for the next thing. And then that next thing, you're doing it for the next thing. And like, there's this constant instrumentalization of programming, where if you ask people to define success in any way other than what it will do for the future, I sometimes challenge myself, like, okay, so I pulled together or helped to pull together a Shabbat dinner for like a community organizing group. How can I define success for that Shabbat dinner in a way that isn't, we gelled a little bit more so that when we do the next action, there will be more people there, or we learn some things that we will then apply in the future? Like what can happen from, 6:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. at somebody's house that is actually going to be powerful, independent of what it leads to afterwards? And I think that we don't ask that question very much. And by the way, I'm really using we, like I do this problematically. I'm not like putting this on others. Like we do this in Jewish life a ton because of our continuity mindset, because of our concern generally about the continued existence of the Jewish people. But then that mindset sort of implants itself onto Jewish organizations, and then it implants itself on Jewish programs within the organizations. So I want to be able to say, like, look, your Judaism on our own terms group on whatever campus, like, it seems like when you come together on a Friday night, you are deeply focused on that being an incredible thing. I mean, I was flashing to August Khan talking about like, yeah, this was like said casually. We put together something where like James Baldwin was on a page with the Talmud was on and I was just like, that's awesome. That's great. I want to do that. When you're in that mindset of each time needing to be beautiful and not only existing to sort of create a rhythm where people come to this thing every week, it opens things up. So to answer your question, like, I think the second we shift our mindset to the one you're describing, where it's not about continuing the existence of things, but rather about things being meaningful in and of themselves, empirically, not instrumentally. Like, I think that the second we do that, the possibilities go sky high, because it means that we are going to try a set of things that we wouldn't otherwise. Because the things that are risky when you are trying to like build a long-term group of people are not, I mean, they're still risky, but like the consequences are smaller if you try to pull off an incredible Friday night event and it's not great. If you're trying to build a long-term community and like you fail to gel a group of people together for the future, that's crappier.
And as a result, it makes you more risk averse.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. Like I think that all of the things we're constantly saying about chutzpah and why we need to be more creative and more experimental and more all of this kind of depend on us being willing to enter into a mindset where maintenance of institutions, maintaining them. I don't mean, custodial stuff. Like we're sustaining, to use our throwback term or our still current term, sustaining innovation. Like that set of ideas necessarily forces all of us into a smaller, narrower way of creating Judaism.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot lately about if we think about this transition that we're in terms of the very nature of what Judaism is, then you can sort of imagine three landscapes of innovation. The first landscape is, let's make synagogues better, let's make JCCs better, let's make federations better, let's make Hillels better. Let's just make all the kind of existing institutions better, meaning that they're more open to the wide variety of Jews that we have, that they're a little bit more likely to survive a little bit longer, etc. There's this middle landscape that I think is the one that most organizations in the, quote, Jewish innovation ecosystem live in, which is relatively adjacent to that world, meaning they're not trying to radically transform Judaism. They're not necessarily opposed to it, but they are still relatively close into the traditional notions of what Judaism is all about. And I think in that world, it makes some sense to say, we should be looking for some new organizations, but they ought to be good organizations in the sense of being sustainable, good at the kind of things that we expect organizations to be. But then there's this other landscape, which I want to picture as really far away from the existing world of organized Judaism. And by the way, right, most Jews, not to mention people that are not currently Jewish that might one day want to become Jewish or just, want to be fellow travelers or whatever. Most people are very far away from the existing world of organized Jewish institutions. But I love the emails that we get from listeners sometimes that say, when you talk about the Jewish world, what do you really mean? Because I don't know this world, and like to me, it seems so obvious what I'm talking about, because I do live in that world, but most people don't live and they don't even know that there's a Jewish world, so to speak. So what should happen in that world? Should we be seeking to build a new set of organizations that are going to somehow define some new Judaism that lives out in that world? I would say maybe long-term, yes. But short-term, I don't think that's the way to go. I don't think it works that way because building an organization is so resource intensive, so time intensive that you should probably be sure that you know what's going to work before you put in all the effort to build a sustainable organization in that space. I think sometimes a genius can come along and create an organization in that space. I would argue, for example, that B'nai Lappi has done that with Svara. I would argue that maybe Amichai Levi has done that with LabShul. A variety of people that we've talked to might arguably be said to be creating sustainable organizations in that space. To me, that's the exception that proves the rule. And I think that a lot of what we're trying to do, what a lot of the, let's say, institutions in the Jewish world that are, in theory, interested in that space are trying to do is find those geniuses that can go out and create sustainable organizations in that space. The more I've been thinking about this question, the more I'm convinced that those geniuses are very few and far between in our day, and that what we really need to do is create the kind of fertile environment in that space through which the geniuses will one day bubble up. If you want to be instrumental about it, I'm not against being instrumental about it, right? I mean, if we should be strategic. We should say, hey, yeah, we do want to have a really thriving Judaism at some point in that space. Now, I'm not sure that that requires institutions that the way we think of it today, and we should talk about that. But let's assume for the purposes of the discussion that it does. The question is, how do we get there? And I think about it as like ecological succession. You know, first the forest burns down, and then the grasses come, and then the shrubs come, and then the bushes, and then the trees, and then the thicker trees. You know, it takes a long time until you get a new forest. And so the question is, what is the analogy in that space to just the grasses coming? And to me, it's about creating passionate, excited people that are able to experiment and try new things out. And so the question for me is like, you know, how do we get more people to be like that?
Here's my answer. I don't think that they're geniuses. I mean, so they have some natural talents, but they have been given or learned or gained a set of skills. And what I really appreciated about the New Synagogue Project episode is they named that both Lauren Spokane and Joseph Berman have a community organizing background. They literally went through a training program about how to organize a community. And so because our episode is, you know, disorganized, we're talking about disorganized, organized, disorganization, organization. Like, I want to break down what do those terms even mean? Because people talk about organized religion. Less often people talk about organized Judaism, actually, but like maybe sometimes they certainly talk about the Jewish world, as you spoke about before, or the Jewish institutional world, like things that I think are getting at the idea of organized Judaism. I kind of, the way I'd answer your question is, I think we need less organized Judaism and more organizers Judaism, like organizers S', like a Judaism of like in the style of organizers, community organizers. People seem to see organized Judaism or organized religion as this big, scary set of institutional apparatuses that aren't focused on individual meaning, that are like, and I think that to some extent there's a level of truth there. And I want us to think from the mindset of a community organizer and think like, how are we going to powerfully achieve X, Y, or Z goal? If you're a community organizer, it's often a political goal. What would that goal be in our Jewish spaces, in our Jewish institutions, and how could we create it? Like, to me, the way to answer your question is to create a world of Judaism that is thoughtful about community organizing. What would it look like if, in order to be on a synagogue board, you had to be trained in community organizing? What would it look like if to be in a youth group as a high schooler, you had to do that? What would it be like if at a camp, as a summer camp, as a counselor, you think about this? And like, anyway, like that's what I'd throw out there on this organization front.
What's interesting is that the examples that you just used are all examples of how organizations could be better by adopting community organizing techniques, which I totally agree with.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, I want to take this argument even outside of that sphere and say, what would the world look like outside of organizations if what the sort of powers that be in the Jewish community, and by the way, I'm not talking there about federations and Hillels, and I'm not even necessarily talking about funders, although I think it could be interesting what funders could do there. but I'm even talking about just like the cheerleading, just the sense of who's doing the right thing, who's doing the best thing. And I think that if we looked out into the world of the people who never touch an existing Jewish institution, and we say, what would success look like in that sphere? And we say, okay, well, what would community organizers do with a group, with a world like that? Would community organizers try to bring people toward existing institutions? Yeah, sometimes they do, like union organizers. But other kinds of community organizers say, no, my job is to help this community. And by that, we mean people with shared interests, people with shared needs, people who may be geographically close to each other or maybe in the world of the internet otherwise close to one another. How do we help them find one another and do something together that makes their lives better? Whether that turns into an organization as we understand it, right? Something that has corporate forms and bookkeeping and taxes and all that kind of stuff, that may or may not happen. So to my mind, I think the campus is a fruitful place to look at that, because we all know that Hillel and Chabad now have these central roles on campus, the way that the Jewish community tends to look at it. There are advantages to that. There are good things about that. We both have had substantial connections to Hillel in the past. But there are also downsides to that, which when I was a Hillel director, I was somewhat aware of. And since the time I have no longer been a Hillel director, I'm intensely aware of, which is the people that Hillel will never be able to connect with in a serious way. And there's all kinds of statistics where you can say, yeah, if somebody came to one Shabbat dinner in the year, we're counting them as someone we connected with. I mean, that's for the most part BS. If we're saying that what it means to have a meaningful Jewish experience anytime in your life, all the more so when you're on campus, is that you have an ongoing Jewish experience that has substance to it, et cetera, Hillel and Chabad are not giving that to a vast majority of Jewish students, and it's not their fault. There are things that could be their fault, but in general, no organization, no institution could do that, because every institution is going to have to define itself in some relatively narrow way, or it's going to be defined in the zeitgeist in that way, and a lot of people are not going to connect with it. We shouldn't seek to have a single umbrella organization on campus or anywhere. We should seek to have something that promotes the massive growth of organizations, or I shouldn't call them organizations, of pseudo-organizations, of collections of people all over the place. Some Hillels will argue that that's what they do, and some might actually do that. But and other kinds of organizations may argue that that's what they do. But usually organizations exist in order to try to bring people in to their central space. That doesn't necessarily have to be a physical space, but they want somehow to be able to, quote, count that person as part of their, quote, community. That's just the nature of organizations. What would a campus look like where every Jew, or, whatever, some large percentage of Jews, were connected to some community of other Jews, but almost as an aspiration, there's no sense that we have a Jewish community on campus, that we have any sort of collectivity. And now a lot of people say, no, but we want collectivity. We have to advocate for ourselves, et cetera, but let's spin it out the other way. Let's say, we don't have any collectivity. We have a sense of inspiration and a sense of giving people the power to, right? Giving people a sense of their own ownership, of their own charge, to say, how can we help you find some meaning in this on your terms, like their name, Judaism on your own terms, is perfect. So I think that we should think about that not only on campus. I mean, I'm talking about campus because we had an organization that was very much doing that on campus, but the San Francisco Urban Kibbutz, what if instead of having a small number of synagogues in any given geographical location, we had a huge number of urban kibbutzim, all of whom had, no more than 10 families in them? What would that Jewish world look like? And what would the organizations have to look like that could make that kind of thing happen, or more likely to happen?
Yeah, I think that'd be a cool Jewish world. I'm glad you called me on that, by the way. I was talking about all the ways in which a community organizing approach could benefit Jewish communal organizations. And even in the middle of a conversation about how that's not the only way to craft, contemporary Judaism, there's all these ways to do so outside of organizations, I was falling back into that mindset. It's so deep in all of us. We we have this thing where somehow Judaism that happens in institutions with acronym names and buildings and 100 years or however long of history, somehow that's what defines the Judaism the most. And then sure, people do other forms of Judaism in other ways, but like that's kind of the dressing on top of the salad. I don't know why Judaism's a salad, but I guess today I'm calling Judaism a salad. I like salads. But like, yes, you're right. Like, it's not just to benefit the organizations, and that's precisely the point. Like, it's all about being able to say that Judaism is something we craft, occasionally even as an individual, although I think that's not the most common way, but like in small groups, that's how this operates. And so I guess when I think about what a Jewish world would look like where that's really lived out, I think that even the institutions that would exist would be less institution-y. Their purpose would be to plant seeds in people external to them and create Jewish projects. Like I think of every year on Passover at my Hillel, actually. My Hillel, and I'm showering praise on my Hillel, and I know that this is many other Hillels too. They would just give people money and give people Seder materials and even some amount of food to do Seders elsewhere.
Right.
They had their Seders in the building, but they would also give money to people, throw it at them excitedly to do things elsewhere on campus or even like in Providence. In my dream Jewish universe, that would be what a lot of institutions do. Like a Jewish Federation wouldn't necessarily be structured around primarily funding the organizational bodies in its geographic area. Like, oh, we give this amount most years to this organization, we give this one here, like these are the 11 that we fund. Like, it would be like, oh, Sally is pulling together a cool Jewish thing, and we are stoked about that, and we're going to tell Sally, do that again and again and build on it, and it can never come back to any of our buildings, and it's great.
I want to note, just for the record, before we move on to other things, that one of the organizations that I've loved the most over the last decade in Jewish life, Bimbam, who we interviewed early on in our podcast series, we interviewed Sarah Lefton, the founder of Bimbam. That organization recently closed, and one can look at that story as a sort of tragic story, right? About the inability of Jewish funders to recognize the enduring value of having an organization that's there to create animated videos, et cetera, that are educational. I agree with that lens. That said, I don't necessarily think that this has to be looked at as a tragic story, in that an organization that's been around for a decade, that creates a tremendous amount of good, that influences a lot of people, and whose oeuvre is being transferred to another organizations to take care of. So
I'm sorry, you have to say that again. Say that again.
Their oeuvre. Right, their body of material, right, is going to be transferred, in this case, to the Union of Reform Judaism to be able to hold on to. So it's always going to be available. And they had a really powerful impact for a long period of time. And who knows what's going to come of that, right? Who knows how many kids are going to say, I was raised on these Bimbam videos and that inspired me, and then when they're 30, they create an organization that's like making Jewish films. I don't know, whatever it might be, right? Who knows? There was an organization called J-Dub Records, which, among other things, discovered Matisyahu, but that for a number of years really kind of created this incredible new edgy Jewish music, and that influenced a lot of people and impacted a lot of people. So even organizations that aspired to be long-term sustainable but, quote, didn't make it, we can re-look at their story from the other end and say, what if we understood them as never having sought that kind of long-term sustainability and just saying, what did they accomplish in the time that they were around? I really want to spin out this worldview in which we say, what would it look like to invest in people and in passion, and not worry so much about whether they're going to be institutions. The one downside of that is it's hard for people to have professional careers in a world like that, because they may not be able to be paid a professional salary, quickly enough And the way that you get paid a professional salary is you start up a new organization, and eventually, hopefully relatively quickly, it becomes seen as sustainable, and then funders will pay you a professional salary. That may be something that we have to figure out a different approach to.
Well, so yes, and improv time. So I agree with you that we should reconceptualize our notions of what success is, and the idea that an organization closes is not necessarily failure. What I want to add, and I think it's a yes and because I'm not sure you disagree with this. There's plenty of things we do disagree on. I don't think it's this. I think that there is a level of tragedy in Bim Bam closing because it wasn't envisioned to close at this moment, and there were things that were that like the conception from the get-go was not that it would last, I don't know, 10 years, 12, whatever it was, and then close. The conception was we're founding this thing and it's going to be around, and there wasn't an end date set. And I actually want to think back to your question about like what the benefits of this new mode of Jewish organization building or Judaism building would be, is I'm thinking about the notion of term limits in politics. Like there's the whole idea of like a lame duck, and it's sort of generally known that when somebody hits their term limit, and they're not going to run again, they sort of get all of their big passion projects on the table before they go. Because like, what are you going to do to me? Like, I can't be elected again. Like, I have no pressure. I don't have to, like, I'm less accountable to whether it's donors or whatever forces. Like, I'm going to do the things that I really want to do. And I actually think that for all my critiques of all sorts of elements of our democratic structure in this country, like, that is a positive thing that we have this mechanism where sort of people are likely at a certain point to really go for the stuff that tugs at their heartstrings and throw any caution to the wind because they really don't have to care about what the consequences are going to be that they're going to lose an election. And like, to me, it's like if Bim Bam had been founded in 2005 or 7, I mean, it was Godcast then, but like if it had started and it was like, this is going to be 10 years, that's it. I can imagine that if that had happened at the 8-year mark, Sarah Lefton, who, by the way, Sarah Lefton is incredible. And this project is so, I mean, like, listen to that episode is what I'm getting at that we had with her a long time ago. If the premise had been, we're going to end at 10 years, period, the 8-year mark would have hit and been like, damn, there's all these things we haven't done yet. There's lots we have done. We have to get these things out now. And so we're going to. I know that sense of urgency would arise. And it's
by the way, it did arise later than that. And it resulted in a great episode of Bim Bam where we were on it because they were trying to like do a bunch of episodes really fast before they closed.
Yeah. And to me, it's like we could look at that as like a bug because an organization is closing. They then do all that at the last second. Like, what if we made that a feature? What if we said, okay, we're going to, whether it's 10 years is a random number I chose. For different projects, you could set different time lengths, but this is going to be 3 years. And we are going to map out, and we're going to staff it, we're going to fund it, we're going to like resource it so that it can really nail it for 3 years. But then it's going to be done. And by the way, in terms of people's careers that you mentioned, they'll know at the start that they need to be looking. It's like a fellowship. Like when I did my 2-year fellowship, it wasn't tragic that at 2 years it ended because I knew it was going to end and I could prep the next portion of my life, which, spoiler alert, ended up working for Judaism Unbound. I haven't heard, if people know about it, send it to us. I haven't heard of a local community being like, we're going to do X thing for 3 years and then it's done. And whatever it will have achieved will be done then. So it has to be that over these 3 years, it's going to knock it out of the park.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I by the way, another example is the Avichai Foundation, which is a huge Jewish foundation that decided about a decade ago that it, rather than just giving 5% annually, which is what foundations have to do, that they were going to spend down the entire foundation over a decade. And that has allowed them to make much larger investments in things for a limited period. It's very much along the lines of what we're talking about. So it's interesting. On the one hand, it became a trend among foundations to think that way. And Avichai is not the only foundation that has adopted this spend down philosophy. But it's interesting that it hasn't necessarily translated to even that foundation, I don't think, but certainly not most other foundations, having that image of organizations that are sort of, quote, spending down over a period of time. And that's fascinating. And, I think that we're not prepared in this episode yet to fully envision what that world looks like, but I'm definitely going to go away from this conversation, and I hope that our listeners will, making some notes and trying to think about what would that world look like that worked that way. And by the way, I would add that you talked about community organizing as being one skill that we need people to have in a world like this. And another one is, and that's why we wanted to have Kirshat Ozench and Margaret Hagan on the show, is because I think another skill is this idea of design and rapid prototyping, right? This idea that, and maybe this connects to what you're saying, that at least in the way that we often think of what a genius is, that's not what we need. We don't need somebody who comes into this world with a fully formed idea of exactly what's going to work. What makes them a genius, I think, also, among other things, is that they have this capacity and this willingness to come in with a really great idea, try it out, and as the feedback comes in, to very quickly make adjustments and changes and really make it suit the needs of the people who need it. And the third element, which is the next series that we're going to jump into coming up, is education. But I think that we have to think about education differently when we're talking about this world, because in a world of stability, in a world of, let's say, institutions, arguably, and arguably not, education can be seen as, we know what you need to know, and we experts are going to come and tell you. In a world of disorganization, in a world of exploration and research and development, I think it's much more, hey, I was trying to do something and I realized that even though I have a lot of chutzpah, I could use a little more knowledge. And I know what I need to learn, or I don't know what I need to learn, but I know the questions that I have. That kind of need-driven education, self-driven education, I think becomes the kind of education that we need in a world like this. And we have some amazing practitioners of that kind of education already. What we need is the capacity to fuel, I think of it as like if you build a little fire and then you add more twigs to the fire and it gets a little hotter and then it's hot enough and then you can add the logs in, and it's like you actually start with the little tiny fire. You don't start with the pile of logs. I think what we want to play out here is, what does the Jewish world look like that starts out in the field, right, where there aren't a lot of trees and you got to bring all the trees there. I don't know, whatever. But if you're going to ultimately make a bonfire, it's not going to start by bringing the huge pile of logs. It's going to start by making those little fires and seeing which ones are really, catching.
For so many reasons, I love that little preview, that little look ahead to our Jewish education unit. I think in a lot of ways that I'm not fully able to articulate just yet, this conversation leads into the education one. I mean, what you're saying now about, starting from the little fire and allowing it to build and with the logs, and I love the imagery of it, but I also think that there's something there about how we educate, how we inculcate ideas, and how we start small and build up and all of those things. But basically, I want us to hold something as we go into this Jewish education unit and moving forward, which is that we are not inheriting this object that must be carefully inspected and polished as it is, and then passed to the next generation. I think that paradigm is how a lot of people operate. It's that we are inheriting. I do think there's an inheritance happening to some extent. Even if you're not born Jewish, I think you can inherit in a sense. We're inheriting a gob of clay or something that we get to create. And that also, by the way, is going to be smashed to pieces by our children and recreated. Once again, our literal children and our metaphorical children who will not be Jews by birth. And as we're thinking about, the idea of disorganized Judaism or disorganized religion, I feel like what's powerful is if we're permitted to create Judaisms that aren't polished, that aren't so perfect, that are disorganized, that feel, ad hoc, then we've got some work to do. We've got really exciting work to do.
Amen. Or as you say, I'm in.
I do that. My I'm in, Amen, Josh, English, Hebrew. Yeah. I need to make a list of these. But we're going to close out the episode and this unit of episodes in the same way we always do. And once again, a reminder that closing this unit of episodes will only open the next. every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, Semisonic fans. We're going to close out this episode in the same way we always do by encouraging you to be in touch with us. There's a variety of ways to do that. I'll name them soon. But just as a reminder, Elul is almost here. That on-ramp month to the high holidays is almost here. Dan talked about it at the top. And we have our Elul Unbound initiative that you can sign up for. Just go to our website and click that Elul Unbound tab right towards the top of the screen. You can sign in to the daily email list. So with that, we're going to close. And here are those ways that you can be in touch with us. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can go to our Twitter feed at Judaism Unbound. Third, you can go to our website, JudaismUnbound.com. And the last way is that you can email us at dan@JudaismUnbound.com or lex@JudaismUnbound.com. We really appreciate you tuning into this set of episodes. Stay tuned for more, our entire unit on Jewish education. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.